The silence inside Hawthorne Manor shattered with a single sentence. The original will is gone. No one moved. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though even the antique grandfather clock had stopped ticking. The polished oak table reflected 6 frozen faces, each one caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Attorney Charles Bennett slowly lowered the empty leather folder onto the table. His hands, steady only moments before, trembled just enough for everyone to notice. "I locked it in this case before leaving my office this morning," he said quietly. "It was here less than 15 minutes ago." Every pair of eyes turned toward the folder. Empty. Not a single page remained. Someone inside this room had taken the will. Outside, rain hammered against the mansion's towering windows. The storm swallowed the estate, cutting it off from the outside world. The gates had already been closed by security after the funeral, and no one had left since. Which meant the answer was standing somewhere around that table. No one spoke first. That was almost more frightening than accusations. 3 hours earlier, the Hawthorne family had gathered under the same roof for the first time in nearly a decade. Richard Hawthorne had built one of the country's largest construction companies from nothing. Newspapers called him a visionary. Employees remembered him as demanding but fair. His children remembered someone else entirely. He believed affection made people weak. Praise was rare. Failure was unforgettable. Even now, after his death at 78, his shadow seemed larger than the mansion itself. The funeral had been elegant, expensive, and emotionally restrained. No dramatic tears, no embraces, only carefully chosen words and polite nods from relatives who barely knew one another anymore. The real storm wasn't outside. It was waiting inside the library. Emily Hawthorne stood beside the fireplace, her fingers wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee that had long gone cold. At 38, she had spent most of her adult life trying to become the opposite of her father. She taught history at a public university instead of joining the family empire. She rented a modest apartment, despite technically being a millionaire, through inherited investments. She preferred second-hand bookstores to luxury boutiques. Many people admired her principles. Her younger brother Daniel called them guilt. "You always pretend money doesn't matter," he had once told her. "It's easier to reject wealth when you know it's waiting for you." Emily never answered, because part of her feared he was right. Today she looked exhausted, not from grief alone. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Their father's final phone call kept replaying in her mind. "I made a mistake 20 years ago. Nothing more." Before she could ask what he meant, he had started coughing violently. The conversation ended. Now there would never be another chance, unless the will explained what he meant. Daniel Hawthorne checked his watch for what felt like the 100th time. 42 years old. Perfect suit. Perfect smile. Perfect financial disaster hidden beneath both. To outsiders, he was the charismatic CEO of Hawthorne Developments. Only he knew how close the company had come to collapse. Risky investments, hidden loans, deals that looked brilliant until markets shifted. He needed this inheritance, not for luxury, for survival. Without it, everything his father spent a lifetime building could disappear under his leadership. Daniel hated admitting failure, especially to himself. He caught Emily watching him. "What? You've checked your watch 12 times. "I counted." He forced a smile. "You always count." She shrugged. "You always pretend you're not nervous." Neither smiled afterward. Across the room stood Olivia Hawthorne, Richard's second wife, only 53, elegant, graceful, impossible to read. She had married Richard 15 years earlier, after working as director of the family's charitable foundation. The tabloids called her a gold digger. Those who actually knew her described someone patient enough to survive Richard's impossible standards. Emily had never decided which version she believed. Olivia folded her hands calmly, yet one detail betrayed her. Her wedding ring kept turning around her finger. Again. 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 A habit she never noticed when anxious. Emily noticed. Daniel noticed too. Neither mentioned it. Near the window stood Marcus Hale, Richard's oldest friend, former business partner, retired judge, executor of the estate. Unlike everyone else in the room, Marcus wasn't related by blood, yet Richard had trusted him more than any family member. Marcus looked unusually pale, not frightened, ashamed. Every few minutes he glanced toward the portrait hanging above the fireplace. Richard's portrait, as though expecting silent judgment. Emily caught him doing it 3 times. Why would a retired judge look guilty? Attorney Charles Bennett cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I should explain that your father updated his will 6 months ago." Daniel straightened immediately. Emily noticed. Olivia didn't move. Marcus slowly closed his eyes. An update. No one had mentioned that. Richard had rewritten everything shortly before his death. Why? There are significant changes. The room grew colder. Even the rain seemed quieter. Charles unlocked the leather case, removed several folders, property records, financial summaries, letters. Finally, a thick ivory envelope. The original last will and testament of Richard Hawthorne. Every eye followed his hands. Charles placed the envelope carefully onto the table. "I'll begin reading." A knock interrupted him. 3 short taps. Everyone turned. The housekeeper stepped inside. "I'm terribly sorry," she whispered. "The police called. The roads are flooding. No one can leave the estate until morning." Charles nodded politely. "Thank you." The door closed. Barely 30 seconds had passed. Charles reached for the envelope again. It wasn't there. His expression changed before anyone else understood. He searched the table, lifted nearby folders, looked inside the briefcase. Nothing. His voice failed. "I don't understand." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Charles looked around the room. The envelope. Silence. It was right here. Emily stepped forward. It couldn't just disappear. Charles searched again. More urgently now. Folders scattered. Pens rolled onto the floor. The leather case emptied completely. Still nothing. Marcus whispered the first impossible conclusion. "Someone took it." Daniel laughed once. A sharp, humorless sound. "That's ridiculous." "No," Marcus answered quietly. "It isn't." Within minutes, every entrance to the library had been locked. Security confirmed nobody had left the room except the housekeeper. She had been searched. Nothing. Every guest remained inside the mansion. Every servant accounted for. The will had vanished without a trace. Suspicion spread faster than panic. Daniel accused no one directly, yet his eyes lingered on Olivia. Olivia noticed. She said nothing. Emily watched both of them. Marcus watched everyone. Attorney Bennett looked ready to question his own sanity. Then Emily noticed something no one else seemed to see. A single wet footprint. Not near the door. Not near the windows. It stood beside the fireplace. Only one. Fresh. As though someone had stepped there moments earlier. She looked outside. The rain had never stopped. Someone in this room had been outside after the funeral. But why would they return through the hidden terrace entrance? that almost everyone had forgotten existed. Before Emily could say a word, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the entire mansion plunged into darkness, and somewhere inside the library, something heavy hit the floor. The sound echoed through the library like a gunshot. Something heavy had crashed onto the hardwood floor. For a moment, no one breathed. The mansion had been swallowed by darkness. Outside, lightning flashed through the rain-soaked windows, painting the room in brief white bursts. Every flash froze the people inside, like figures in an old photograph. Emily instinctively reached for the edge of the table. "Nobody move," Marcus ordered. His calm voice carried the authority of the judge he had once been, but even he couldn't hide the tension creeping into it. Another flash of lightning revealed a chair lying on its side near the fireplace. Nothing else. Then the emergency lights flickered to life. A pale yellow glow spread across the room. Everyone was still standing exactly where they had been, except Daniel. He was now several feet closer to the attorney's desk. Emily noticed immediately. "So," she said quietly, "what were you looking for?" Daniel turned slowly. "I wasn't looking for anything. You moved. So did everyone." "No," Emily replied. "Only you." The room became uncomfortably silent. Daniel laughed, though there was no humor in it. The lights went out. I lost my balance. "Toward the missing will?" His jaw tightened. "You think I stole it?" "I think you're standing where the envelope disappeared." Before Daniel could answer, Olivia stepped between them. "This isn't helping." Her voice remained soft, but her hands were shaking. "We're turning against each other before we know a single fact." Marcus nodded. "She's right." Charles Bennett knelt beside the fallen chair. "It wasn't here before the blackout." He examined one of its broken legs. "It looks like someone knocked it over." "Or threw it," Daniel muttered. Emily looked around the room once again. The wet footprint she'd noticed earlier was still there. One footprint. No matching second print. It made no sense. If someone had entered through the terrace, where were the rest? She crouched beside it. The sole pattern was unusual. Not leather. Not a dress shoe. Rubber. Like the bottom of an expensive hiking boot. None of the family members wore hiking boots. She slowly lifted her eyes. Marcus wore polished black shoes. Daniel wore Italian loafers. Charles wore Oxfords. Olivia wore heels. Then whose footprint was it? Security Chief Alan Pierce arrived moments later. A former military officer. Alan had protected Richard Hawthorne for nearly 12 years. He rarely smiled. Tonight, he didn't even try. "The house has been sealed," he announced. "No one enters. No one leaves. We've searched the main entrances. And?" Alan hesitated. The terrace door was unlocked. Everyone stared at him. It shouldn't have been. Marcus frowned. "Any signs of forced entry?" "No." So whoever opened it had a key, or had already been inside. Emily felt the thought settle heavily in her stomach. Alan organized a search of the entire mansion. The servants moved through more than 30 rooms, every office, every guest bedroom, every hallway. Nothing. The original will had vanished as though it had never existed. Charles sat heavily in one of the leather armchairs. There were 3 copies. Emily looked up. 3. Only one original. The others were certified copies. "Where are they?" Charles swallowed. "In my office." Daniel immediately stood. "Then we read one of those." Charles shook his head. "They disappeared yesterday." Silence. Emily stared at him. "You didn't tell us?" I thought someone had misplaced the files. You lost every copy. I didn't lose them. His voice cracked. They were stolen. For the first time that evening, genuine fear appeared on Marcus's face. This wasn't spontaneous. No. Charles looked at the empty folder. Someone planned this. Dinner was served despite no one being hungry. Richard Hawthorne had insisted throughout his life that problems were solved around a table, never by avoiding one. Old habits survived death. The family gathered in the enormous dining room. Silver cutlery, crystal glasses, untouched food. Daniel broke the silence. Father changed the will 6 months ago. Charles nodded. Yes. Who knew? You. Emily looked up sharply. What? Charles met Daniel's eyes. Mr. Hawthorne visited my office during the signing. Daniel froze. I wasn't present. You arrived afterward. I remember because your father refused to discuss the contents. Emily turned toward her brother. You never mentioned this. There was nothing to mention. You knew he changed everything. I knew he signed papers. That's different. Olivia quietly placed her fork down. So Richard didn't trust any of us. Nobody answered, because nobody could honestly disagree. Later that evening, Emily wandered into the west hallway. She remembered playing there as a little girl. Richard had rarely joined her. Work had always come first. One door stood slightly open, her father's private study. It had remained locked since his death. She stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedarwood. Everything appeared untouched. The desk, the shelves, the globe in the corner. Then something caught her attention. One drawer wasn't fully closed. She pulled it open. Inside lay a small leather notebook. Not a diary. A list. Dozens of names. Dates. Amounts of money. Some names had been crossed out. Others circled in red ink. On the final page, one sentence had been written by hand. If they find the will, they'll never understand why I did it. Emily felt a chill run through her. Who were they? And what had Richard done? She slipped the notebook into her coat pocket, just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. She quickly closed the drawer. The door opened. Marcus stood there. For a brief second, surprise flashed across his face. I thought everyone was downstairs. I needed some air. In your father's office? Emily forced a small smile. I suppose old memories. Marcus studied her for several seconds. Then his gaze drifted toward the desk, almost instinctively, as though checking whether something was still there. Emily noticed. So, she asked casually, did my father ever keep documents here? Marcus answered too quickly. No. The lie was obvious. Richard Hawthorne had handled countless business contracts in this very room. Marcus knew that better than anyone. Why would he deny it? As midnight approached, the storm finally began to weaken. Most of the servants had gone to their quarters. Only security remained awake. Emily couldn't sleep. She returned to the library. The wet footprint had already dried. Kneeling beside it, she measured its size with her hand. Large. Probably a man's boot. She looked toward the hidden terrace entrance. It was almost invisible behind a row of velvet curtains. Someone unfamiliar with the mansion would never have found it, which meant the person who entered, or left, knew the house well. A family member, a trusted employee, or someone Richard himself had invited. Just then, she heard a faint metallic click. The sound came from inside the wall behind the fireplace. She stepped closer. Another click, then silence. Running her fingers along the carved wooden panels, she felt a slight vibration. There was something hidden behind the wall. Before she could investigate further, a voice spoke behind her. "You shouldn't be here alone." Emily spun around. Alan Pierce stood in the doorway. His flashlight pointed toward the floor. His expression was impossible to read. Then he slowly raised something from his pocket. A single sheet of ivory paper. Its edges matched the missing envelope perfectly. "I found this," he said quietly. It was burning. Emily's heart stopped. Burning? Where? Alan looked directly into her eyes. In the mansion's furnace. The first page of Richard Hawthorne's missing will had survived the fire. But someone had made absolutely certain the rest never would. The surviving page lay on the library table, its edges blackened by fire. Alan Pierce had wrapped it in a clean handkerchief before carrying it upstairs. Now Charles Bennet carefully unfolded the fragile paper while everyone gathered around. No one spoke. The room was so quiet that the rain dripping from the gutters outside seemed deafening. Charles adjusted his glasses. "The first page confirms this is Richard Hawthorne's final will." Daniel leaned closer. "What does it say?" "Very little." Charles frowned. "The first page only contains the legal introduction." He turned the paper over. Nothing. The rest had been burned. Daniel slammed his fist onto the table. "So, we're back where we started." "No," Emily said quietly. "We're not." Everyone looked at her. She reached into her coat pocket and placed the small leather notebook on the table. "I found this in Father's study." Marcus immediately stiffened. Charles slowly opened the notebook. Page after page contained names, dates, and handwritten notes. Some entries were ordinary business records. Others were anything but. Payments made secretly. Scholarships sent anonymously. Medical bills covered for former employees. Mortgage debts paid for families Richard had never spoken about. Emily watched the expressions around the room change. The ruthless businessman they thought they knew had quietly spent years helping people without ever taking credit. Then Charles reached the final pages. His face turned pale. "There it is." "What?" Emily stepped closer. A name, written twice. Marcus Hale. Beside it, Richard had written, "He still blames himself. He must never carry this alone." Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time since the funeral, he looked like an old man. I hoped he'd destroy that notebook. Daniel stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Marcus slowly sat down. "There is something none of you know." 32 years earlier, Richard Hawthorne had almost lost everything. Not because of business, because of one terrible mistake. Marcus and Richard had been driving home after negotiating the biggest contract of their careers. Marcus had insisted on driving. He had been exhausted. Just after midnight, he fell asleep behind the wheel. Their car crossed into the opposite lane. A young couple's vehicle swerved to avoid them and crashed into a tree. The husband survived. His pregnant wife did not. Marcus wanted to confess. Richard stopped him. "I'll handle it," he had said. Richard used his influence to keep Marcus's name out of the investigation. Officially, the accident became a tragedy caused by poor weather. No charges were filed. Marcus never forgave himself. Neither did Richard. For more than 30 years, Richard secretly supported the widower and his daughter financially, without revealing who he was. Emily looked at the notebook again. Every payment, every date, it had all been there. "He wasn't buying silence," she whispered. "He was trying to repay a debt that could never be repaid." Marcus nodded without lifting his eyes. I begged him to tell the truth. He always answered the same way. "One ruined life is enough." Daniel remained silent for several moments. Then he asked the question no one else dared. "What does this have to do with the missing will?" Charles answered. "Everything." He turned another page. A folded note slipped onto the table. Richard's handwriting covered both sides. Charles began reading aloud. "If this notebook is ever found, then my last plan has probably failed." Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. Charles continued, "I know someone will try to steal my will." Daniel frowned. He expected this? Emily's pulse quickened. Richard had known. Long before he died. Charles kept reading. "Money has divided this family for too many years. If my children fight over these pages, then they have learned nothing from my failures." Olivia slowly covered her mouth. Richard had anticipated exactly what had happened. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "The original will is hidden, where only the person who remembers our happiest day together will think to look." Charles lowered the paper. Silence returned. Emily frowned. "Our happiest day together?" Olivia suddenly whispered. "The greenhouse." Everyone looked at her. Richard had proposed to Olivia inside the estate's abandoned glass greenhouse. It had been the only place he ever described as peaceful. They hurried across the estate despite the rain. The old greenhouse stood forgotten beneath climbing ivy. Inside, broken glass covered the floor. Most of the plants had long since died. Olivia walked directly toward an old stone bench. She knelt. Her fingers searched beneath the seat. Then she smiled through tears. There. Taped underneath the bench was a waterproof metal box. Alan carefully removed it. Charles unlocked it. Inside lay a sealed ivory envelope. Untouched. Richard Hawthorne's original will. Daniel stared in disbelief. It was never stolen. Emily slowly shook her head. No. It was hidden. Charles broke the seal. This time no one interrupted. He began reading. Richard divided the majority of his fortune equally between Emily and Daniel. Olivia received the estate itself and the charitable foundation she had spent years building. Long-time employees received generous bonuses. Several charities received substantial donations. There was no shocking redistribution of wealth, no secret heir, no cruel surprise. Daniel looked confused. Then why hide it? Charles reached the final page. Richard had attached one last handwritten letter. He read aloud. "If you are hearing this, then you already know someone believed the inheritance was worth stealing. That person has revealed more about themselves than any lawyer ever could. The estate is not my greatest legacy. Your choices are." The room remained completely still. Then Alan quietly cleared his throat. "There is one more thing." Everyone turned. He placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside was a flash drive. "I found this hidden inside the furnace." Charles connected it to his laptop. Security footage appeared. The library. Minutes before the reading. The hidden terrace door slowly opened. Someone entered wearing dark, waterproof boots. A hood covered the person's face. The figure walked directly toward the attorney's briefcase, removed the envelope, then disappeared through the same hidden door. Alan paused the video. The camera outside the terrace captured the face. He clicked again. The hood came down. Daniel inhaled sharply. It wasn't Olivia. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't a servant. It was Charles Bennett, the attorney himself. No one spoke. Charles looked at the screen, then quietly removed his glasses. "I never intended to destroy it." His voice sounded defeated. "I only wanted time." Emily stared at him. "Time for what?" Charles lowered his head. "For Daniel. The room froze again. Charles looked toward Daniel. "Your father asked me to keep your financial collapse secret." Daniel's face turned white. "I discovered the debts months ago. He believed that if you inherited immediately, your creditors would seize everything. So you stole the will. I planned to return it after restructuring the estate." Alan interrupted. "Then why burn it?" Charles closed his eyes. "I didn't." Everyone stared. "I hid the envelope in my office. When I went back, it was gone." Emily felt the pieces finally fall into place. Charles had stolen the will. Someone else had stolen it from him. Marcus spoke quietly. "The hidden box." Emily nodded. "Father moved the original himself before he died." Richard had anticipated betrayal from everyone, including his own lawyer. He had allowed them all to reveal themselves before the truth emerged. Months later, Hawthorne Manor stood quieter than it had in decades. Daniel resigned as CEO and admitted the company's financial problems publicly. For the first time in his life, he asked for help instead of pretending to have all the answers. Olivia expanded Richard's foundation, funding scholarships for children of construction workers. Marcus finally met the family whose lives had been changed by the accident 32 years earlier. There was no forgiveness, only honesty, and strangely, that was enough. Emily became the guardian of her father's notebooks, not because they recorded his wealth, but because they revealed the man hidden behind it. Richard Hawthorne had spent his life building towers of concrete and steel. In the end, the hardest thing he ever built was the chance for his family to tell each other the truth. And that, unlike money, could never disappear.